Thank you for the cross, Lord. Thank you for the price you paid, bearing all my sin and shame. In love you came and gave amazing grace. Thank you for this love, Lord. Thank you for the nail-pierced hands. Wash me in your cleansing flow. Now all I know, your forgiveness and embrace. Worthy is the Lamb, seated on the throne. Crown you now with many crowns. You reign victorious, high and lifted up. Jesus, Son of God, the treasure of heaven crucified. Worthy is the Lamb. Thank you for the cross, Lord. Thank you for the price you paid, bearing all my sin and shame. In love you came and gave amazing grace. Thank you for this love, Lord. Thank you for the nail-pierced hands. Wash me in your cleansing flow. Now all I know, your forgiveness and embrace. Worthy is the Lamb, seated on the throne. Crown you now with many crowns. You reign victorious, high and lifted up. Jesus, Son of God, the treasure of heaven crucified. Worthy is the Lamb. Worthy is the Lamb, seated on the throne. Crown you now with many crowns. You reign victorious, high and lifted up. Jesus, Son of God, the treasure of heaven crucified. Worthy is the Lamb.
The date is August the 16th, 1977. When the news is heard that Elvis Presley the king of rock and roll, has apparently died from a heart attack, along with some other unhealthy aspects of his lifestyle. It sent shockwaves through Memphis first and then through the southeast. But it wasn't very long until people, not just from across the United States, but from all over the world, were gathering around Graceland in shock and unbelief. The message was echoed time and time again: the king is gone. The primary Memphis newspaper, the Commercial Appeal, carried the headlines, "Death Captures Crown of Rock and Roll." An entertainer by the name of Ronnie McDowell, don't think he's any relation to Kathy McDowell Gay, but he wrote and recorded a #1 hit that was a tribute to Elvis entitled, "The King is Gone." Now, the last few lines of that song, and don't worry, I will not sing it, I'll just read it. All right. You're quite welcome. The king is gone. Oh, the king is gone. Long live his name. Yeah, the king is gone. Oh, the king is gone. Long live his name. And then it ends, "Goodbye, Elvis. We'll miss you." Well, I wonder if that attitude and atmosphere didn't pretty well permeate the city of Jerusalem on that very first Sunday morning, at least among the few believers and the disciples that were there. Dreams were dashed and hopes had disappeared. For the longed for, hoped for King of Israel, in their mind, was gone. Or was he? In Mark chapter 16, we pick up with that first Sunday morning. And I want us to look at the events and the people that are involved as it begins to unfold before us. I know it's difficult for you when you're familiar with the passage, but let's visit it as if for the very first time. And note to begin with the people in verse 1. They're identified as Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James and Salome. If you will look back in verse 47 of chapter 15, you'll find a list of the women that were standing there watching when the tomb was rolled over, or the stone was rolled over the tomb of Jesus, and it was sealed. They were watching as Jesus was being buried. Now that's important because later some are going to say that they went to the wrong place. Well, they knew where they were going. But what I want you to see this morning is that these unimportant women, and first of all, they were unimportant because they were women, ladies, in that day, are mentioned by name not once but twice here in just 2 verses. You see, when a person is devoted to Jesus Christ, there is no such thing as an unimportant person. When you are serving Him, He knows the deed and He knows your name. And He keeps it for all eternity. But understand, as they went for a purpose. You see, the Jews didn't embalm, but they placed their dead in tombs, and they were not airtight tombs. So to cover up the smell of decomposition, they used spices. And they would roll those spices in the cloths that wrapped the bodies. They had gone that morning not looking for a resurrected Christ, not expecting the tomb to be empty. They came expecting to find a decomposing body. Then why did they go? You see, it was love that brought them to that burial site that morning. One writer speculates that at the close of the Sabbath day when Jesus was crucified, you know when the Sabbath day was completely over? Sundown. And have you ever noticed at sundown there's still some daylight left? Somewhere along the line they got that wrong, didn't they? But one writer speculates that at sundown, which it would have been legal then, the shops open. I mean, after all, they're Jews, right? And that these ladies went and bought their spices at sundown. But they didn't have time to make their way to the tomb and do what they wanted to do, so they waited until the next morning. But regardless, they went to that tomb first thing. Why? Simply because of their love for Jesus Christ and their desire to do something, anything for Jesus. Now that may sound like such a simple little thing, but I want you to understand that anything and everything we do for the Lord is never forgotten. And they learned that morning. But look now at their perplexity. There they are, they're going to the tomb, and this is recorded in verse 3 and 4, and in verse 3 they state the problem. They were saying to one another, saying, pretty good translation, who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance of the tomb? This verb is an imperfect continual action. They were asking over and over and over and over and over again the same question. Guys, should I dare say that that's the way women converse? But they're not coming up with a solution. They're just saying, what are we going to do when we get there? The tomb is sealed. There's this big old stone. There's a soldier there. It has the emperor's seal on it. We have neither the power nor the authority to open it. What are we going to do? But what I find interesting is they did not stop to question what they were going to do once they got there. They just went on to do what they knew that God would have them to do. And then something amazing happens. Look there in verse 4. They get there and the problem's solved. That tomb comes into view. And what do they see? The stone has already been rolled away. They discovered that their problem had already been solved. Now I mentioned that tomb was sealed. It doesn't mean that it was airtight. I have seen some of these tombs on top of the ground where they bury more than one people in. Don't mean to be gross, but they do that, you know. And when they put that plate over, it's sealed, airtight. Is that what this means? No, it had Pilate's seal on it. And anyone that broke that seal could face capital punishment. It also had soldiers standing at the entrance of the tomb. Now what I want you to see is they had neither the power nor the right to roll that stone away, yet they went to the tomb because they felt like that was what God wanted them to do. We, and when I say we, I mean me, have a tendency to look at problems. That's kind of the men's mentality. Ladies, don't mention a problem if you don't want it solved, because we're going to be looking for a solution. I'm going to sympathize with you, right? But that was an issue here. We're not to focus on the problem. We're to focus on what we feel like that God wants us to do and let Him take care of the problem. One of my favorite examples of this is found in the book of Deuteronomy, in chapter 1. The children of Israel arrive on the threshold of the promised land. They're here at Kadesh Barnea. And since they're Baptists, they appoint a committee of 12. And they say, go and spy out the land and see what is the best route for us to take. Now read that very carefully, because that's exactly what they say, to see the best way to take the land that God has promised us. But the 12 go out, and when they come back, they get a majority report, don't they? It says, well, yes, it's like God said. There wasn't enough for them, though, was it? So there are giants in there, sons of Anak. There are walled cities in there. It is a land that devours its inhabitants. Now, where'd they just come from? The desert. And here they walk through an area that has trees and wild animals and ravines and mountains, and they're overwhelmed. And the majority report says, because of the giants, because of the walls, because of the terrain, we cannot take it. They see the problem. But Joshua and Caleb, they deliver the minority report, right? They say, yep, just like you say. There's some high walls in there, but remember, God's higher. There's some giants in there, but remember, God is bigger. It is a terrain that devours its inhabitants, but God has already promised it to us. You see the difference? One was focusing on the problem. Joshua and Caleb were focusing upon the promise of God and what he told them he wanted them to do. And so many times we miss doing what God wants us to do because all we can see is the problems. And if we will just start and do what God would have us to do, he'll take care of the problems by the time we get there. Now we need to make sure that it's God's will and not our own will, or we might run into a wall and it won't be moved. But if it's his will, he can take care of the stones, the giants, or the walls. But look at the power in verse 5 and 6. They get there and it says they marvel. Yeah, I bet they were amazed, don't you? They were scared out of their wits when they looked in there and there's such a guy dressed in white. But there's nobody there. A simple little message. He's not here. He's risen. I think we sing that sometimes, don't we? I had the opportunity a number of years ago to visit the traditional burial site of Jesus. It's just across the hill from the traditional site where he was crucified. They may have not gone very far with him. Went in there and looked around a few minutes. Had to kind of stoop over. There's a shelf in there, probably where they would have laid a body. We don't know that it's Jesus' tomb or not, but if you haven't been over there, you've seen the picture of it. Our Palestinian guide said that 2 or 3 tour groups before us, one of the ladies rushed in there with her camera and she looked around and said, "Is that it?"